What if Rome had not collapsed under the weight of its own problems, but instead had been defeated by its greatest rival? What if Carthage, led by Hannibal, had risen as the true empire of the Mediterranean? It's a question that flips our entire understanding of history on its head. Rome is everywhere in our culture, from movies and TV shows to school textbooks and video games. Carthage, on the other hand, is usually remembered only as Rome's rival in the Punic Wars, a footnote to Rome's glory. But in truth, Carthage was powerful, wealthy, and for a time came terrifyingly close to ending Rome's story before it had really begun. In this alternate history, we'll explore a world where Hannibal doesn't fade away after his daring march across the Alps. Instead, he becomes the dictator of Carthage, reshaping it into a superpower that could dominate the Mediterranean for centuries. Imagine a Hannibal-ruled Carthage standing as the center of politics, warfare, and trade, dictating the future not just of Europe, but of the world. No Roman legions conquering Gaul, no Latin language spreading across Europe, no Christian Rome guiding the Middle Ages. Instead, a Punic world order, one that could have rewritten everything from the geography of empires to the languages we speak today. Over the course of this video, we'll dive into the politics of Carthage, Hannibal's potential reforms, the military consequences of a Carthaginian resurgence, the economic strength of its trade empire, and the geographic realities that shaped its fate. We'll look at how the Punic Wars could have ended very differently, and what kind of world might have followed if Carthage had survived Rome. And here's a question for you. Would you want to live in a Hannibal-ruled Carthage? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to hear your thoughts. And because this is a brand new channel, What If History, your support means everything. Hit subscribe, share this video with fellow history enthusiasts, and help us reach 10,000 subscribers to keep bringing alternate history scenarios to life. Carthage began not as a sprawling empire, but as a colony, founded by Phoenician traders from the city of Tyre. These were people who thrived on commerce and the sea, known for their ships, their navigation, and their ability to create wealth through trade rather than conquest. Situated on the North African coast, Carthage grew rapidly into a powerhouse. Its location was perfect, close to vital Mediterranean routes, with access to fertile lands and rich harbors. In time, Carthage evolved from a colony into the beating heart of a vast trading network that stretched from Spain to Sicily and across North Africa. Its navy became the envy of the ancient world, controlling the seas with fleets of warships and merchant vessels. If Rome was destined to become the land power of the Mediterranean, Carthage was its mirror, the naval and commercial titan that stood in its way. In these early centuries, Rome was little more than an ambitious city-state, one of many scattered across Italy. Carthage, by contrast, already commanded a sphere of influence that touched 3 continents. While Roman legions were still figuring out how to secure control over the Italian peninsula, Carthage was projecting power across the Mediterranean. Rome was the underdog, the challenger that had to fight uphill against a state richer, older, and more experienced in global power politics. This imbalance led to the clashes that would define the ancient world, the Punic Wars. The First Punic War broke out over Sicily, a jewel of strategic and agricultural value. Carthage, with its powerful navy, seemed destined to win. Yet Rome surprised everyone by building a fleet from scratch and adapting quickly to naval warfare. The war dragged on for more than 20 years, and in the end, Rome took Sicily, a staggering defeat for Carthage, but one that set the stage for the far greater struggle to come. The Second Punic War introduced the world to Hannibal Barca, a general whose name still echoes through history. With a daring plan that seemed impossible, he marched his army, including elephants, across the Alps to strike directly into Italy. Against all odds, he succeeded, bringing Rome to the brink of destruction. At Cannae, Hannibal executed one of the most brilliant tactical victories ever recorded. His smaller force encircled and annihilated a much larger Roman army, killing tens of thousands in a single day. For a moment, it seemed as though Rome's story might end there, swallowed by Carthage's brilliance, but history tells us that it didn't. Despite his victories, Hannibal never captured Rome itself, and over time the balance shifted back. Rome adapted, wore down Carthage's resources, and finally defeated Hannibal at the Battle of Zama in North Africa. Carthage was left broken, its empire in ruins, and Hannibal forced into exile. Yet here lies the tantalizing question: What if Hannibal had not retreated into obscurity after Zama? What if, instead of fleeing, he had turned his energy inward, seized power at home and restructured Carthage into a centralized, militarized state capable of standing against Rome once more? Would Carthage have risen from defeat to dominate the Mediterranean, rewriting the destiny of Europe, Africa, and the wider world? Rome's final victory over Carthage came at the Battle of Zama, where Hannibal faced Scipio Africanus in North Africa. It was a devastating defeat. Carthage's once mighty armies were broken, its cavalry outmaneuvered, and its dreams of dominance crushed. The peace terms were humiliating. Carthage was forced to give up its overseas territories, reduce its fleet to a handful of ships, and pay enormous reparations to Rome. For a city that had once ruled the waves, this was nothing short of humiliation. Rome stood ascendant and Carthage seemed destined for decline. But history often turns on individuals who refuse to accept defeat. Hannibal, despite his loss, was not just another general. His soldiers adored him, feared by his enemies and respected even by the Romans. His charisma, tactical brilliance, and sheer determination made him a figure who could inspire loyalty beyond ordinary limits. What if, instead of retreating into exile after Zama, Hannibal had taken a bold step, turning his military reputation and popular support into political power? In this alternate path, Hannibal does not fade away into history. Instead, he returns to Carthage and seizes control, overthrowing the wealthy oligarchs who had often hindered him during the war. These elites, cautious merchants more concerned with trade profits than military survival, were deeply unpopular after they handled the Punic Wars. Hannibal could have positioned himself as the savior of the state, rallying the people and his loyal veterans behind him to take command as dictator, and this would not have been unprecedented. Centuries later, Julius Caesar would rise in Rome on the back of military glory and popular support, reshaping the Republic into an empire. Napoleon Bonaparte would do something strikingly similar after the chaos of the French Revolution, using his victories and personal charisma to seize control and crown himself emperor. Hannibal had the same ingredients: military genius, political unrest, and a loyal army. The moment was ripe for a strongman to emerge. This divergence is plausible because Carthage was fragile after Zama. The oligarchy was weak, public confidence was shaken, and the need for decisive leadership was obvious. With his record of victories in Italy, Cannae alone would have secured him legendary status. Hannibal could have framed himself as the one man capable of restoring Carthage's pride and power. It would have meant breaking with Carthage's tradition of collective rule, but desperate times often invite radical solutions. So here's a question for you. Do you think Hannibal could have realistically overthrown the Carthaginian elite and taken control of the state? Yes or no? Drop your answer in the comments. I'd love to hear your take. If Hannibal had seized power in Carthage, his first challenge would have been overcoming the crippling restrictions Rome imposed after Zama. Carthage was forbidden from raising a strong army. Its fleet was reduced to a shadow of its former glory, and it was shackled with heavy tribute payments. Yet Hannibal was not the kind of leader to accept limitations. His mind was built for strategy, for finding advantages even in the harshest conditions. In this alternate world, Hannibal would set about quietly rebuilding Carthage's military strength, using both cunning and diplomacy. The most logical step would be to return to Spain. Before the Second Punic War, Spain had been the foundation of Carthage's overseas wealth, with its rich silver mines funding armies and fleets. Rome may have demanded Carthage withdraw, but Hannibal could have looked for ways to re-establish influence, either through secret treaties, puppet leaders, or even covert settlement. Control of Spain once again would give Carthage the resources it needed to rebuild, fueling both its economy and its war machine. At the same time, Hannibal had always been a master of alliances. During his campaigns in Italy, he managed to peel away Rome's allies and force them into rebellion. As dictator, he could redirect this talent toward diplomacy on a larger scale. Macedon and the Greek states had already shown interest in weakening Rome, and with the right promises, they might have thrown their weight behind a resurgent Carthage. Numidia, Rome's fickle North African ally, would have been another target. With Numidian cavalry on his side, the very troops who turned the tide at Zama, Hannibal could have matched or even outclassed Rome's military strength. And then there was the sea. Carthage had always been a naval empire, while Rome excelled on land. Rome's legions were formidable, disciplined and relentless, but their power depended on overland campaigns. Carthage, under Hannibal's direction, could rebuild a navy that once again controlled the Mediterranean. Imagine the map. Trade routes from Spain to Sicily, from Africa to the Levant, all patrolled by Carthaginian warships. Rome would be trapped inland, its expansion hemmed in by Punic dominance of the waters. While Rome relied on its armies marching across Italy and Gaul, Carthage could move faster, striking where it pleased, using the sea as both highway and shield. Now picture the twist. In our world, Carthage was besieged by Rome and eventually destroyed. But in this alternate history, Hannibal could have turned the tables. Instead of Roman armies surrounding Carthage, it could have been Carthaginian armies, supplied by a resurgent navy and strengthened by foreign allies, that marched on Rome itself. The Eternal City, the heart of the Roman Republic, is under siege from the very enemy it thought it had crushed. The psychological effect alone would have been seismic. Rome, so proud of never yielding to foreign invaders, might have faced the unimaginable, defeat on its own soil. Under Hannibal's dictatorship, Carthage would no longer play defense. It would become the aggressor, using Spain's resources, Greek and Numidian alliances, and its naval supremacy to choke Rome's lifelines. For once, Rome would be the city fighting for survival, and Carthage the empire dictating terms. If Hannibal had seized control of Carthage after Zama, his vision would have required more than just military revival. It would have demanded a complete political and social transformation. Carthage's old system was dominated by wealthy merchant families, an oligarchy that prized profit and commerce over long-term strategy. These elites had often clashed with Hannibal, restraining his campaigns and prioritizing their own interests even as Rome closed in. As dictator, Hannibal would almost certainly have moved quickly to curtail their power. He would centralize authority in his own hands, reshaping Carthage from a merchant republic into a state driven by military and political unity, much like what Rome had become under its own strong leaders. One of Hannibal's likely reforms would be the creation of a permanent professional standing army. Carthage traditionally relied on mercenaries, Iberians, Numidians, Gauls, to fight its wars. While effective in the short term, this system created instability, as loyalty could shift with pay. Hannibal, shaped by years of commanding multi-ethnic armies, would have understood the value of discipline and consistency. By building a core force of professional soldiers loyal to Carthage itself, he could rival the Roman legions not just in tactics, but in institutional strength. This would have marked a dramatic break with Carthaginian tradition, but might have been the only path to long-term survival. This transformation also raises the question of assimilation. Rome's greatest strength wasn't just military, it was political inclusion. Conquered peoples could become allies, even citizens, which wove them into Rome's fabric, instead of leaving them resentful subjects. Could Hannibal have introduced a similar system? Imagine Carthage offering citizenship or protected status to Iberians, Numidians, and Sicilians in return for loyalty. Instead of being viewed as outsiders, they could have become stakeholders in a Punic empire, helping Carthage bind together a vast and diverse Mediterranean world. Such a reform would have been radical for a city that traditionally kept itself apart from its colonies, but it could have given Carthage the cohesion it always lacked. Religion, too, could not remain untouched. Carthage was infamous in the ancient world for its devotion to Baal and the reports of child sacrifice, practices that horrified outsiders, especially the Romans, and were used as propaganda against them. Hannibal, pragmatic as always, might have recognized that for Carthage to endure as a Mediterranean superpower, it needed to adapt. He could have downplayed or reformed controversial rituals, integrating more widely accepted religious practices from Greece and North Africa, or elevating traditions that emphasized strength, unity, and discipline over sacrifice. By reshaping Carthage's religious identity, Hannibal could have reduced foreign hostility and created a more unifying belief system for his empire. But here lies a fascinating dilemma for us to consider. Would Carthage need to abandon its old traditions, political, military, and even religious, to survive as a superpower? Or could it have remained true to its heritage while still competing with Rome? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm curious whether you believe Hannibal's Carthage could thrive without fundamentally reinventing itself. If Hannibal had secured control of Carthage, he would have had one great advantage that Rome could never fully match: wealth built on trade. Carthage's strength had always come from the sea, from its ability to dominate the commercial arteries of the Mediterranean. From the silver mines of Spain to the fertile fields of North Africa and the grain of Sicily, Carthage sat at the crossroads of the ancient world's most lucrative routes. Unlike Rome, which fueled its expansion through land conquest and taxation, Carthage had grown rich by taxing goods, securing markets, and protecting merchant fleets. Hannibal, with his strategic brilliance, could have turned this system into the foundation of a Punic resurgence. Under his rule, we can imagine Carthage rebuilding its naval supremacy, not just as a military shield but as an economic engine. A powerful navy could escort trading convoys, secure colonies, and extend Punic influence far beyond Africa. Control of the seas meant control of wealth, and with that wealth, Carthage could hire more soldiers, build more ships, and fund the kind of professional army Hannibal envisioned. Rome's legions marched across land, but Carthage's ships could move faster, reach farther, and ensure that every corner of the Mediterranean felt Punic influence. Carthage's African heartland would have also been critical. North Africa was already one of the most fertile regions of the ancient world, producing vast amounts of grain, olives, and other agricultural goods. If Hannibal had invested heavily in developing this agricultural base, Carthage could have become the breadbasket of the Mediterranean, rivaling or even surpassing Egypt in its ability to feed growing populations. Combine this with Spain's mineral wealth and Sicily's strategic harvests, and Carthage had all the ingredients to become not just a military rival to Rome, but an economic superpower that could outlast it. The result might have looked like a blend of two powers we know from later history, Venice and Britain. Like Venice, Carthage would have thrived on commerce, diplomacy, and naval dominance, turning the Mediterranean into its personal marketplace. And like Britain, it would have combined naval supremacy with a network of colonies and trade outposts, using the sea as both shield and lifeline. A Punic empire under Hannibal's leadership could have been the first true maritime superpower, centuries before Britain claimed that role. It is fascinating to imagine a Mediterranean where Carthage's sea-based economy outpaced Rome's land-based empire. Instead of Latin law and legions, it would be Punic trade laws, Punic merchants, and Punic fleets shaping the destiny of Europe, Africa, and beyond. If Hannibal had transformed Carthage into a strong, centralized power, the rivalry with Rome would not have ended quickly. Instead, the Mediterranean might have seen a drawn-out contest for dominance, a struggle that could have shaped the ancient world in ways far different from what we know. Three broad outcomes stand out as possible paths in this alternate history. The first possibility is that Rome could have been crushed early under Hannibal's leadership. With Spain reclaimed, alliances in Greece and Macedon strengthened, and Numidian cavalry brought back to his side, Hannibal might have led Carthage into a new war that Rome was unprepared to fight. A well-supplied Carthaginian force landing in Italy, backed by naval superiority, could have broken Rome before it had the chance to adapt. In this version of history, Rome might never have become an empire at all. The Eternal City could have been reduced to a client or even razed, remembered only as the defeated rival of Hannibal's Carthage. Punic institutions, Punic trade, and Punic law would have then shaped the Mediterranean. The second possibility is a balance of power, a Cold War of the ancient world. Carthage and Rome, unable to destroy one another, might have divided the Mediterranean into spheres of influence. Rome could have dominated the Italian peninsula and parts of Gaul, while Carthage controlled Spain, North Africa, Sicily, and the seas. This would have created a fragile peace, punctuated by proxy wars in Greece, Egypt, or the islands. Instead of a single empire imposing its culture, the Mediterranean would have developed under two competing superpowers, each checking the other's expansion. The seas would echo with Punic warships, while Rome's legions stood guard over the land, a dual system of dominance that might have lasted centuries. The third and perhaps most fascinating is eventual Carthaginian supremacy. Over time, Hannibal's reforms and economic base could have given Carthage the advantage, slowly wearing Rome down until the Republic was reduced to a subordinate state. Rome, once so proud of its independence, could have become a client of Carthage, providing soldiers or grain while submitting to Punic overlordship. Imagine the cultural shift this would have produced. Instead of Latin spreading across Europe, it would have been Punic that became the language of diplomacy, law, and scholarship. The great works of philosophy and science might have been written in Punic script, not Latin, and Europe's intellectual traditions could have flowed from Carthage rather than Rome. The ripple effects of such a rivalry would have been enormous. Greece, always caught between greater powers, might have aligned with Carthage for protection against Roman aggression, or perhaps leaned toward Rome in hopes of resisting Punic dominance. Egypt, a wealthy and strategic kingdom, could have become the prize in a struggle for influence, its grain shipments tipping the balance between the two giants. Gaul, instead of being absorbed into Rome's empire, might have remained a contested frontier, or even a partner of Carthage, opening a very different path for Western Europe. And here's the dramatic speculation to leave hanging in your mind: a world where Latin never spread, where Rome never cast its shadow across Europe. Instead, Punic would be the language of learning, of law, and of empire. Europe's identity itself could have been written in the tongue of Hannibal's Carthage. If Carthage had truly triumphed and risen as the dominant Mediterranean empire under Hannibal's leadership, the long-term consequences for world history would have been immense. Rome's absence as the central imperial power means no Roman Empire shaping Europe's institutions, no Latin Christendom spreading across the continent, and no cultural blueprint built on conquest. Instead, history would have unfolded under a Punic model, one rooted in trade, seafaring, and commercial networks. Without Rome, Christianity's path would have been very different. Rome's adoption of Christianity as the state religion turned it from a small sect into a global faith. In a Carthaginian world, Christianity might never have become the dominant spiritual force in Europe. Perhaps it would have remained a regional faith, spreading only in pockets, while other Mediterranean religions or Punic practices endured. The great cathedrals, the papacy, the Holy Roman Empire, none of these would exist. Instead, spiritual life might have blended Punic traditions with Hellenistic influences, creating a far different religious map of Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. The scientific and cultural legacy would also be transformed. Rome glorified military conquest, celebrating generals and legions. Carthage, by contrast, built its strength on commerce. In an alternate history where Carthage reigned supreme, progress might have been driven less by territorial conquest and more by innovation in navigation, trade, and finance. A Punic Mediterranean empire could have advanced shipbuilding, global exploration, and commercial law centuries ahead of schedule. Instead of roads stretching across Europe, imagine networks of ports, markets, and trading colonies shaping the foundations of civilization. Africa, too, would stand in a very different place. Instead of being seen as Rome's frontier, North Africa would have been the heart of a global empire. Hannibal's Carthage would have elevated Africa as a center of power, culture, and wealth, creating a legacy where the continent stood at the core of world civilization rather than being relegated to the margins. In this alternate history, Africa's role in world history would not be defined by later colonization, but by its leadership in shaping global trade and culture. And here's the most striking modern parallel. If Carthage had survived Rome and continued to expand, its naval empire might have reached the Atlantic centuries before Spain and Portugal. Imagine Carthaginian colonies in the Americas, Punic merchants trading across the ocean, and an entire new world shaped by African and Mediterranean influences instead of European conquest. This is not just a shift in borders, but a total rewriting of world history, where Carthage becomes the bridge between continents. A Carthaginian victory would have created a world where trade routes mattered more than battle lines, where Punic script and culture became the standard, and where Europe, Africa, and the wider Mediterranean looked nothing like the history we know. This is the ultimate alternate history, a Punic world order instead of a Roman one. It is tempting to imagine Hannibal's Carthage reshaping the Mediterranean into a Punic empire. But to stay grounded, we have to acknowledge the very real limits that made such a scenario unlikely. Carthage was always politically fragile. Its government was dominated by a council of wealthy oligarchs who prized commerce above all else. While Hannibal had the charisma and military prestige to challenge them, it is far from certain that he could have permanently dismantled their influence. Even if he seized power as dictator, maintaining that grip would have required constant pressure against entrenched elites who were deeply resistant to military-driven reform. Unlike Rome, where strongmen like Caesar eventually transformed the system into imperial rule, Carthage lacked a tradition of centralized leadership, making Hannibal's dictatorship an extraordinary but unstable departure from the norm. Geography also worked against Carthage. Rome's power base sat in the heart of Italy, a defensible peninsula with relatively few natural barriers within it. Once Rome secured the Italian peninsula, it had a unified core from which to project power outward. Carthage, by contrast, was a maritime empire. Its possessions were scattered across Spain, Sicily, North Africa, and the islands, connected by sea routes that were vulnerable to disruption. This gave Carthage wealth and reach, but made it much harder to consolidate into a single, cohesive state. Even with Hannibal's brilliance, holding together such a fragmented empire would have been an uphill struggle compared to Rome's geographic advantage. And then there is the question of Hannibal himself. Could one man, even a military genius, realistically maintain dictatorial control over a city so deeply shaped by its oligarchic traditions? Hannibal's victories had made him popular, but Carthage was not Rome. Its elites had already forced him into exile once, and their economic power gave them tremendous influence. He might have toppled them temporarily, but keeping them sidelined would have been another battle entirely. Without lasting institutional reforms to back his rule, Hannibal's dictatorship could have been fragile, vulnerable to assassination, revolt, or factional resistance. Recognizing these limits does not diminish the fascination of the scenario. In fact, it strengthens it. By understanding why Carthage historically failed to match Rome's durability, we can better appreciate the scale of what Hannibal would have needed to achieve. This isn't pure fantasy. It's a grounded exploration of alternate history that balances possibility with realism, showing just how close Carthage came and how difficult it would have been to replace Rome truly. Hannibal's dictatorship could have reshaped Carthage into something far greater than the defeated city history remembers. By curbing the power of the oligarchs, centralizing authority, and building a professional army supported by Carthage's immense wealth from trade, he might have forged a Mediterranean superpower capable of challenging Rome on equal terms. With naval supremacy, strategic alliances, and a restructured political system, Carthage had the ingredients to rewrite history. Yet geography favored Rome's unity, and Carthage's reliance on a fragile oligarchic system meant that even under Hannibal, stability would have been difficult to sustain. And so the question lingers. Would we be living in a Punic world today, one shaped by Hannibal's vision and Carthage's dominance of the seas? Or was Rome's rise inevitable, written into the geography and politics of the ancient world? Now I want to hear from you. Who would you like to see win, Rome or Carthage? Drop your answer in the comments below, and let's get the debate started. And if you enjoyed this exploration, hit subscribe to help grow What If History to 10,000 subscribers. Your support makes all the difference. And if you're ready to keep exploring right now, don't stop here. Check out the video on screen for another deep dive into a world that almost was.